here. So I am on the phone, I guess you could say, with Anne. We've got a new little streaming setup. You can actually see both of us at the same time. But in any case, this is going to be it's actually kind of our last movie discussion, at least for a little while, because we're discussing the music of the Hoopa movie, Hoopa and the Clash of Ages. Comparing the opening, or not the opening, there's no opening theme for this one, actually. We're comparing the ending themes between the two sides. Let's see, on the Japanese side, that's Tweedia, which I have my liner notes here right for. And then on the English side, we have Every Side of Me by Danny Marcus. So this is going to be an interesting discussion. Just to kind of review how the way this one works, eventually we'll get into the actual discussion. We'll talk about the ending themes. We'll also include a discussion of the, the score, and that's kind of about it. There is a sort of, maybe a loosely associated short. It's either with this or the movie after, and I'm not 100% sure which one it is. But that's sort of the deal there. We'll also talk about our thoughts on the movie itself. But yeah, after this, we're out of movies. But it's not the end of our discussion series by any means. I have another idea lined up for next month, but I'll leave. Let's see. I just want to check to make sure we have those. Oh, good. We do still have those from our test stream earlier today. I didn't know if it would come through on those. But anyway, we do have our next segment lined up. I did put a poll out there a couple weeks ago. Did get a few votes. Thank you for doing that if you took the time for that. But yeah, so I think we're just going to go straight into it in just a moment. Let me adjust a few things here. All right. So yeah, Anne, are you about ready to record on your side?
I am absolutely ready.
All right, let's go ahead and get this started. I will do an introduction. We may also, I'll get to some channel business once this discussion is all finished. So do stay around for the end there if that's something you're interested in. So let's see. Record on one. Record on the other. Our volume levels look good.
Right.
Yeah, even though we have this live stream, we do record separately our own audio streams. Hi, folks. Steven here. I'm on the phone with Anne from Pikapi Podcast. And this is a bit of I don't know if somber is the right word, but this is actually going to be not our last discussion by any means, but this is actually the last for now in our series of discussions of the music of the Pokemon movies. So this time around, we are talking about the music of Hoopa and the Clash of Ages. I forget what the Japanese name is a little bit more complicated as it often is. But we're sticking to our usual format with this. We're going to be talking about a couple things. One of those is the ending themes. Let's see. On the Japanese side, we have Tweedia, and the artist's name is a little bit complicated in there. On the English side, we have Every Part of Me by Danny Marcus. I have some thoughts. I have some notes punched up that I've written up on this. We'll also be talking about the score and some of the other stuff. And then you may be wondering, well, gee, if you're out of movies for the time being, what are you doing in your next episode? Well, stick around. We do have a plan in, and we'll go into that a little bit later. But first of all, Anne, why don't you tell us who exactly performs? I cannot, it's like Ray something or other, but who performs Tweedia and what's her backstory?
All right. So Tweedia was performed by Ray Yasuda. She was born Rachel Rhodes, and she was born in North Carolina in the United States, actually. Her mother was Japanese, and it looks like her father may have been in the military, so she moved with them to Japan at age 3 and was schooled at the Okoto Air Force Base, and so speaks both English and Japanese fluently, and decided to make her career in Japan as a singer. She says her influences are people such as Alicia Keys and Maria Takeuchi, Love Psychedelico, and my favorite, Utada Hikaru. But she actually started out in entertainment as a model. And after passing an audition to model as part of a virtual band, the Genki Rockets, which were a fictional band made up as part of a Nintendo game, and they had a kind of a whole series. So maybe some of you gamers out there are more familiar with it than I am. But they had this band as part of it, and Yasuda, when she proved she could sing in her audition, didn't just get to star in the video, but sang on the album and is kind of the front person for the Genki Rockets as Lumi. This was back in around 2006 when Yasuda was in junior high, and her school didn't allow students to have performing jobs, so she actually kept all her work with Genki Rockets a secret until she was able to transfer to a new school that allowed her to pursue singing. Um, and in 2013, she began pursuing a music career full time. And she debuted with the song Best of My Love, which had a tie in as the ending of Space Battleship Yamato 2199. So she's still dealing with space. But she has branched out since then and is enjoying a lovely career as a singer and a model. She also hosts radio shows and has begun writing song lyrics, including Boom Clap by Charlie XCX. So some of you have actually heard her work, even if you're not dialed into Japanese music. Um, in 2016, she won the Teen Choice Award at the MTV Music Awards and is still going strong. She's had 2 studio albums to date and released 2 singles so far this year. She's kind of a bit of a newer artist compared to some of the others I've talked about who started like in the 90s or earlier. So it's exciting to think that she probably still has many more years and major accomplishments ahead of her. But that's what I have on Rei Yasuda.
So, can you kind of explain those two names there? Obviously, she was born in the United States. Where does the other name come from then? Can you kind of explain that?
I don't have a lot of info on where it comes from. Yasuda may have been her mother's name. Rie could be a nickname she had, or, maybe it's her middle name. I don't have a lot of info on where that came from.
So then, what kind of details do you have on this the song itself? Then how that got produced and associated? Because it sounds like if she did some video game work before, that would kind of give her an in on some of this. Any of that? How it fit together, or
Yeah, and it's kind of a nice little circle of connection. Um, uh, Rachel Rhodes, Ray Yasuda, performed this song, but the lyrics were actually written by Kenji Tamai, and co-written by Akiko En. And Mr. Tamai, he was born September 6th, 1971, and he's a music producer and the CEO of Ageha Springs, a Japanese music production team. He wrote music for Genki Rockets, which, Miss Yasuda was working on. And he's also written for groups such as Scandal, who we talked about on earlier episodes. So that kind of might explain how he got into working on this song for Pokemon. He's, in with Nintendo, he's in with Yasuda. They've all worked together before. He's also credited many times as translating songs from various K-pop groups, such as Shiny and Girls' Generation, CN Blue, translating their songs into Japanese for the Japan release. So he also has working on established properties, not just original music. It also suggests he speaks some Korean, but I can't confirm that. But yeah, like between him and his production team and having worked with Yasuda and having worked with Nintendo, I'm not surprised that all these people came together again to work on another project.
definitely makes sense. And like I said, connections are still a very big part of the music industry these days, and I can certainly vouch for that. Even though I'm not a professional musician, I've often gotten interviews, by contacting one person, and that person knows someone else in the Pokemon music sphere, and can, first of all, that might be how they got their role, but it also gives me an opportunity to find additional folks. So, not a complete surprise there. Any other production details about this song?
Yes. Unlike some of the other ones, this one has a lot of side credits on it. One of them being co music production was Masahiro Tobias Binai, who is another member of Ageha Springs. He co-wrote the music and kind of seems to work on a lot of projects with Kenji Tamai. And the lyrics were co-written, as I mentioned, by an Akiko N. And because they just published under their surname as just an initial, it's hard to track down without getting real deep in the weeds who this Akiko is who wrote the songs. I have a few suspicions, but there are a lot of songwriters out there named Akiko, so I don't think it's even fair to speculate, but there were a lot of people came together to work on this song.
Yeah, like I said, not just connections there, but I think that they probably had a fair bit of fun working on this one. That was sort of a team effort, it sounds like.
Seems so.
Okay, well, on the English side, kind of unfortunately, I suppose, nothing against Danny Marcus, but because we talked about her a fair bit as to what she was up to last time when we talked about her song for the Diancie movie, and we also talked about her a couple years ago when we talked about the Magirna movie. Same staff as usual. I'm guessing that they liked what they got out of her work on the Diancie movie and decided to use her again and also in the next movie. But no real special like writing people on this. It's Ed Goldfarb, as you would probably expect for this era. I'm not sure exactly if that was their intention, that as long as the first one worked out, they would use the same one for all the X and Y movies or what there. But yeah, that's about what I have to say. I don't want to belabor it too much more, but kind of like I said, from a discussion perspective, this is going to be a pretty short segment here.
I'm curious, is Danny Marcus, does she have the most movies under her belt for Pokemon ending themes? Because I know a couple of them have had maybe subsequent movies, but I don't think anyone's got 3 full movies in a row.
I believe she does have the record in that area, having the ending theme, the primary ending theme song in that area. I think the only other person I can think of off the top of my head who's done it multiple times is Haven Pashal, who did both the I Choose You and lead vocals, along with some other folks in the Power of Us song from last year's animated film. So I don't know if she's going to get tapped to do an ending theme song for this Mewtwo Strikes Back remake in the English version. Maybe she'll be singing We're a Miracle or something else entirely. You never know. But Danny Marcus, as far as I know, she's done some other work, I believe, as well. But as far as movie ending themes on the English side, yes, she does have that record, as far as I know.
Cool.
Okay, well, let's talk about how these ones actually sound. We're going to go back over to the Japanese side. So Tweedia, definitely a very energetic song with some very, I guess you say, high energy vocals. It kind of reminds me thematically is if you took the Japanese ending to the Shaman movie one and sort of amped that up a little bit and kept it at a more consistent high energy rate. Does that kind of make sense to you, Anne?
Yeah, no, it's definitely like a power ballad with a lot of kind of R&B style vocals. Like comparing her to Crystal K from One is very apt. I was thinking as I listened to it, you can tell one of her influences was Utada Hikaru. But yeah, no, like there's just a lot of soulful energy and sliding and emotion behind the words that I really appreciate. I do have to say, I don't know if it's a full criticism because I love the song as it is. It does have, you say, very positive and uplifting and bright and energetic music behind it. But when we get to talking about the score of this movie, in Japanese, there were some very unique things to this movie going on in the score that like I often complain aren't there in the score. And I feel it's really odd to have Shinji Miyazaki being on point with a melodic theme, and then the ending theme doesn't fit any of the other tracks in the movie. But again, I don't know if it's a criticism because I really like the song as it is.
Yeah, this is from a scoring perspective because of all the characters in it. Pretty complicated. When we get to the score, we may spend a fair bit of time on the score this time around, discussing some of the particulars. I think this is going to be like that.
Yeah.
let's see. One second, let me punch up my notes that I have here. Let's see. So yeah, I'm not sure what else to say about it besides the highly positive tone as far as like the instrumentation and stuff like that. But I did look up, as I usually try to do, a translation of this song
Awesome.
on Bulbapedia. But Anne, I want to give you the first shot of this. What is the song actually talking about?
Okay, so based on the title Tweedia for you flower nerds, that's a very cute little flower shaped like a star. It's usually bright blue, which is kind of a rarity in the natural world. And it symbolizes hearts that believe in each other or blissful love. It's used a lot in flower arrangements that you would give to somebody as a bouquet or wedding or, you know, making up with somebody, giving someone flowers in a hard time. And that's kind of what this song seems to imply is the the protagonist of the song is looking through some old memorabilia, say a photo album or something, and finds the pressed flowers of the Tweedia from the time they received flowers from another person. And then they're reminiscing on that time that they were not having a good time in their life. They stood all alone in the darkness, and every time I sought happiness, I lost sight of everything else. But another person came into their life and gave them flowers, and because of that, like was able to cheer them up and make them laugh and get them through their hard time. And now they're looking back on it from a better place, and and just kind of reminiscing and hoping that maybe they can pass it on, or maybe they can continue to become a better person or return that favor.
Yeah, I mean that was the I read the translation on Bulbapedia, and it seemed to have some of those. There were actually I sort of gravitated towards a couple of particular lyrics that, like I said, this is based on that translation, so it may not be
Mhm.
100% accurate, but things I thought that kind of matched up with the movie. So let's see. First of all, one of those is "Forgot When to Stop," which
Mm.
we see in the prologue, sort of that Hoopa starts summoning things to sort of test its own might, and sort of goes a little too far there. Let's see, what else did I notice? Oh, you mentioned the album part. I didn't notice the phrase "bound album" and
Mhm.
"believe in our bonds." I think those two are kind of significant given the connections theme kind of in this movie, in that, like,
Mhm.
there are sort of the or the sometimes actually the confinement, because there's the prison bottle, which is used to store um, Koopa's more powerful side. And then there's also, let's see, something about the old me. Um, do those sound kind of like places that kind of make sense to sort of gravitate towards when I was reading through this? That's a weird way
Yeah.
to phrase it, I know, but
No, no. I gravitated toward different lyrics, but I really like the ones you picked out as well. Kind of in the same vein, in that first stanza, like I stood all alone in the heart of darkness. Every time I seek out happiness, I would lose sight of everything once I lose myself. Um, like I kind of am recalling the prologue of the movie where you've got Hoopa, you know, wanting to make people happy and show off its power, and everybody's clapping for it and everything, and then sort of starts losing sight of the bigger picture as it destroys everything around it and kind of loses itself. And um and the oh, where is it now? Hmm. I don't okay, but yeah, anytime I believe in our bonds, when I face a hard time, I won't be afraid. When it talks about the bonds that we share and the way you can overcome and become stronger, I think about the ending of the movie, spoiler alert, where um like Hoopa is fighting its dark side in a sense, and Ash is fighting a dark side, and all these things. And it's the memories and the like I'm not alone because you are here, and and the connections between people that help them to overcome that and to eventually escape. So I think I think what you picked out ones that are a bit more literal than I did, but there do seem to be a lot of tiebacks to the movie in a way.
Yeah, yeah. Now, if we assume that this song is supposed to be from Hoopa's perspective, it does say
Mm.
our bonds. Who exactly is our? The other half of that, or the other segment of that? Is it the folks from where Hoopa is from? Is that any thoughts there?
Maybe a bit of both. Like I think definitely it made connections with Pikachu and Ash. I think definitely what's the girl's name? Mira and Hoopa talks about like how and no Blazar. Ah, the dude and the little girl, and they talked about how their grandfather considered Hoopa family and the like. So I think there's a lot of connections between there. And I we'll talk about this later. I don't really understand this movie, but I do feel like towards the end of the movie, you got the sense that Hoopa was much more connected to the city it lived in and the people who lived there with it, and not as much in the beginning where it was just performing for people and everybody look at me, I'm so strong, everything's about me. So assuming I'm right in picking that up as one of the metaphors in this movie, I think that is another connection, is just its connection to place and to community. Murray and Baraz, there we go.
Yeah, yeah. I sometimes I'll admit some of the human characters that are introduced in this movie not nearly as interesting or as memorable as Hoopa. I would say.
Fair.
Um, I guess one other thing we should mention: there is a music video for this song. Have you seen that? And do you have any thoughts on it?
I've seen two. There was the one that was kind of intercut with Pokemon scenes, and then I saw the short version that was put out by Yasuda's official channel. Which one are you talking about?
Well, the only one I recall seeing is the one that came with.
The DVD?
Yeah, so I picked this up on a CD DVD combo, which you see in Japan sometimes, and the CD has 3 tracks, Tweedia, and a couple. I guess you could call them B-sides.
Mm-hmm.
The DVD is rather short and doesn't have a proper menu. It just has the music video on there. I don't recall there being any scenes from the movie in there, so that's kind of the version I know of.
Okay. Cool. And what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I don't know that it had a super in-depth plot or anything like that. It's mostly about people giving and receiving flowers, which I don't
Oh,
know,
okay.
remember how
That
many of
is,
them were actually like the Tweedia plant, but
yeah, no, that is the one I saw then. I saw a short version of that. Yeah. Like a lot of different flower arrangements.
yeah, it definitely goes, I suppose, with some of the lyrics in there, but no distinct ties to the movies. There's no footage there. Although I think I remember when we were talking specifically about like Detective Pikachu and stuff and the Carry On music video, that you kind of don't always like, just maybe not randomly, it's probably being a little too harsh, but just having scenes from the movie intercut in there. Is that sort of, am I
Yeah.
characterizing that correctly, Anne?
That's generally my stance. I just want a movie or I want an AMV.
I think I kind of get it. I'm not sure I totally agree with that, but
You don't have to.
in any event, so I think that makes a good. So I think this is a good time then, I guess, to go over. So with that being said, I think that's about what we're going to get musically out of Tweety at the moment. But let's talk about every side of me. Like I said, Danny Marcus, one of her 3 ending themes, at least thus far. One of the things that strikes me, in terms of tonality, this song is very different from Tweedia. It starts with a very somber opening, and it
Mhm.
does get more energetic as time goes on before it goes into sort of that piano version that you hear at the very end, which seems to be pretty well in common with some of the more recent Pokemon movies, as they do the ending theme song, and then there's a sort of a piano rendition, usually of that song, towards the end of the credits, with the exception of, I guess, I Choose You. But very, very different tonality. Did that strike you, Anne?
Yes, very much so. Like the as we were talking about the score earlier, this one kind of fits in with that score a little better, although I do believe the English score was a little different than the Japanese one in that way. So, I might have to revise my thinking on that. Maybe it doesn't fit quite as well, but like it fit that theme of this location based on Dubai for location scouting, like with those stringed instruments and the minor key.
Yeah, definitely based on Dubai. I have I guess a bit of trivia that for that later, maybe. But yeah, I just want to notice one, or I did want to note one technical aspect of it. Some of the drum samples use what's called gated reverb. It was very big in the '80s and has been making a comeback sporadically in the last few years. But basically, it's a case where the echo of something is louder than the original source, which is kind of not naturally possible, but is done with various types of effects, either like a electronic synthesizer or stuff like that.
Mhm.
There's a good video out there that I'll try and put a card into at some point. But I
Cool.
did kind of want to point that out. That's why the drums have that interesting sound that sounds kind of like almost like an '80s song in a sort of way. Although the song itself does sound more modern than that.
Hmm.
Let's see. And then towards the middle of it, before we start talking about the lyrics, towards the middle of it, there's a little bit of a Middle East style interlude. I don't like really. It's always a little bit. What was I about to say there? It's always a little bit tricky with this. I like to say if you ever played a desert level in a video game, because this thing is often used. This style of music is often used for that type of setting, but what did you kind of think of that, and maybe structurally before we get into the lyrics?
Well, like you, I'm have trouble describing it. If my piano teacher's watching, I'm going to guess it's like a natural harmonic minor scale, but it's that it's a sort of scale of music that's very indicative of Southeast Middle East and the styles of music there. And I on the one hand, I really appreciate them trying to tie it back to, this city is a place in the Pokemon world and it has its own music style and its own feel. But this song goes a lot of places in starting kind of in the somber area, and then it kind of gets to a much more positive area, and then it gets to like a piano. I'm not sure if I'm completely sold on it going so many places, but it does grow on me. So I think the more I listen to it, the more I'll let that go.
Yeah, I kind of see what you're saying there. Yeah, it is a little bit kind of structurally a bit unusual, I guess is the best way I can put it.
Yeah, maybe unusual. Not necessarily bad. I'm not sure it's convinced me yet.
Well, let's talk about the lyrics then. So I did, like I did with the translation to Tweety, I found I did call out a few of them. At the very beginning, in that somber passage, it says something about create something with room for only me, which is
Mhm.
sort of referring, I assume, to sort of Hoopa in the opening sequence, how it kind of got a little selfish and sort of, wanted to test its might and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But there were a couple other ones I did put in. First of all, there's the "Were you surprised?" which is kind of a
Oh yeah.
something I believe Hoopa actually says something or something very close to that several times in the movie,
Mhm. Mhm.
which I felt was a nice touch there. And then there's also this recurring line that says, that tear us apart and bring us together. I think is a line or something very close to that. Is something that happens several times in there. That's Yeah, I'm not gonna say that's the most genius bit of lyrics ever written or anything like that, but it does give it a little bit of flavor there, I would say. And did you have any particular lyrics that caught your attention?
Well, I'm kind of with you on that tear us apart or bring us together. That whole chorus section, you know, every side of me, all my hidden places, all the different faces that compete to share your heart. Um, like I get to thinking about Hoopa and their journey through this movie a lot, and them being a selfish character and a prankster, someone who puts on a face in a way to kind of hide their vulnerabilities, and has trouble connecting to people, and how the people it meets throughout this movie sort of come to find every side of Hoopa, and all of the things that make Hoopa who it is, and guide it metaphorically to where its real home is. Again, I don't understand this movie. It's harder for me to find the metaphors in the song lyrics, but I feel there's something very, very interesting and very tied to the movie in here in a very poetic way. I love our "Tell Me Were You Surprised" as well, being like that Hoopa's literal catchphrase, but there's something quite beautiful in the chorus there, I think.
Yeah, there is. Of course, I kind of came back to every side of me. You did mention that there is, what I mean by that is that, there's two very obvious sides to Hoopa. There's sort of the two parts of its power or personality or whatever that are sort of forcibly split. Of course, the name "Every Side of Me" does seem to imply there are more than two, that there are at least, 3 or 4. And I think you did a good job sort of laying those out there. So I just kind of wanted to point that out as sort of maybe things are a little more complex than you might see at a surface level there. I just felt it was worth mentioning.
Not everything's black and white? What?
No, those are the previous movies. Anyway.
Oh, whoops.
Any case, yeah, that's a lot of what I have to say there. I'm not sure how much else there is. Let's go ahead and go into our compare and contrast and decide which one we like better.
Oh,
so this was kind of an interesting one for me. We talked about how tonally, in terms of mood and stuff, very, very different there between the two sides. Tweedia definitely more energetic. Every Side of Me definitely slower, even though it does sort of lighten up as time goes on. I get the feeling that if I knew more Japanese, the Tweedia would probably hit me harder and probably be, I don't know about super easy, but probably be relatively easy for me to say that it comes out ahead. But, because my Japanese is so limited, when I listen to Every Side of Me, I get what they have there. I think my criticism with Every Side of Me would be that I would like there to be more of a through line in terms of plot, maybe more of a verse, more in the verses and stuff like that sort of describe Hoopa's journey, akin to, one of the all-time classic Pokemon movie ending themes, The Power of One, where each verse does serve at least a little bit more of a purpose than it seems like here. It seems like with Every Part of Me, they sort of hit the general themes of the movie, but there doesn't seem to be as much of a progression as maybe Tweety has. And any thoughts on what I just said there?
I actually agree completely. Like, I think in the end, I would give it to Every Side of Me just because it fits the movie well enough, and tonally and musically, it is a little more fitting with what I think the score was going for. But at the same time, the lyrics in Tweedia are so deceptively deep, and there's a lot to think about and uncover the more you go into that, and you can continue to find more connections to Hoopa. But just because it tonally doesn't match the score, and it's vague enough, or at least symbolic and metaphorical enough, that things don't immediately jump out at you as a connection, I feel like it's almost a tie. They both have strengths and weaknesses that make me hold back from giving them the victory. But I think Every Side of Me does fit the movie a smidge better. So that's where I'm going.
Yeah, Every Side of Me is one I think to more, even though Tweedia is maybe a little more polished and produced. It's obviously very J-pop as well. You said R&B. It's definitely made to sound like stuff on Japanese radio. But This is, I'll admit, kind of a tough decision because I feel like the English one does have some areas where it could have been improved. But I think I enjoy listening to it just as music a little bit better, even though the other one is very well composed and produced. I don't know if it might be my decision, might be every part of me, but only by a hair or a little bit. These are kind of close. They do different things well, which is something we often find in these discussions. But neither of them, I don't feel like it does it so well that it sets itself apart. Is that about where you're landing, Anne?
Yeah, if I came across Tweedia in a music store, I would totally buy it for myself. But since we're talking about, is it the right ending theme song for the movie? I feel like I have to give it to every side of me.
So yeah, kind of an interesting decision there. Every matchup is a little bit different, but this one I think it has some aspects of some of the other ones. But yeah. Okay, well, no opening theme on this movie. They don't use. Let's see, it would have been. I'm actually having trouble remembering which one. It's not. Gosh, it's not obviously Pokemon XY. It's what would it have been on the Japanese side if they decided to use that?
I think it was Ikuze, right? XY, yeah. Huh. Let me look that up real quick. But yeah, no, I think it was Ikuze, aka the best pun ever.
Let's see. Let me go quick look on my phone and see when this is. Yeah, I think the English one was Be a Hero, because I think Stand Tall is the third one, and that's in the Magirna movie. I'll just mute my phone so we don't actually hear this, but let me just see if I can see the...
Okay, so this would be Pokemon Series XY Kalos Quest, right? That season?
Yeah, this is the middle season of it.
Okay, hang on.
Yeah, so definitely, okay, so... Yeah, sorry we kind of forget these things. Yeah, so Be a Hero is definitely the middle theme, so that would have been what would have gone here on the English side. See, we don't know everything, folks at home.
No, we don't.
Oh, hey, we've got someone in there. Honey Drop Heaven 777. Let's see.
Oh, I think, okay, so maybe they were still using Mega V. Let me go. When did that switch over?
Wouldn't know. Yeah, a little bit of a break here. I guess I can use some time here to, like I said, I just said hello to our folks. We do record these live. I mean, some of this will probably be edited out, but you get the idea. We do record these and always appreciate having viewer feedback on this. But yeah, we're about to go into the score in just a little bit. We were just talking about double checking what the intros would have been had this thing actually used them. Some other things.
Get a Bonbon, Mad Paced Getter. I don't even remember that song.
Oh, I do.
Okay, good.
Well, part of it is because part of me really, my Japanese is terrible. I wanted to write a parody called Autobahn Bon, but
yeah?
Look out, it's a VW. Oh no. No, that one I definitely remember, and that one actually has a music video. So yeah, Getter Bon Bon, yeah, that fits in the middle there on the Japanese side. Okay, so I think let's go ahead and I'll redo that. So yeah, this movie doesn't actually have an opening title sequence that uses the main theme for that season. Let's see, on the Japanese side, it would have been Getter Bon Bon, one of my favorite Japanese openings, at least of this era anyway. And then the English one would have been Be a Hero. But because of the way this movie is structured, they decided not to do that. Never quite sure exactly why. Some of it just depends on what the opening scenes of the movie are like and whether there's a good place to put such a thing in there. Although I think maybe in the in the Magirna movie that comes after this that we did a discussion on a couple years ago, they actually do use that, but it's not actually in the opening of the movie. At least on the English side, they toss it in a little bit later. Okay, I got a little note from let's see, Honey Drop Heavens likes the music. Like I said, anything you have, we're about to go into the score. But as far as the score to this movie, so this is one of the, I guess, thus far, 4 of the more recent movies that has a fairly different English score than the Japanese version. Now, as with most of these, there's at least a few things that are carried over. You know, the future is now thanks to science, Clement's science theme, and like some of the Pokemon game themes are in there, but a lot of it gets replaced. Now, there is, of course, I showed it earlier, an album that has the music from that has the Japanese score. Now, of course, there's a Japanese score album, but we don't have an English version, so it's kind of hard to listen in isolation. But I think there's going to be a lot to talk about here, just in part because what the Japanese score did is that it brought back a fair number of themes from previous Japanese versions of the Pokemon movies. There was, I definitely detected, I looked up a few of these. I'm pretty sure, let's see, there was definitely a reprise of a theme from the Latias and Latios movie when those Pokemon appear. It's one of the ones towards later in the more dramatic or more serious parts of that movie. I forget exactly how it goes, but I definitely recognized it once I looked it up and stuff like that. I believe Arceus's theme from the Arceus movie, Arceus and the Jewel of Life, is also present in there. Now, there is one track that says like Lugia appears, and I tried comparing that to the Japanese Lugia's theme and didn't really notice any similarities.
I didn't either, and it made me so sad. Like, I felt that would be the one perfect place for it.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they did it there. I mean, of course, if you really wanted to go the full 9 yards or whatever you want to call it on this movie, what they would have had to do is, they would have to get the English Lugia theme, which we didn't get in the Zera Aura movie, The Power of Us, that came out last year. They used the Japanese score. So we got the Japanese Lugia theme, which did make it. Boy, and then, you have to, everything after like the third movie, of course, all those legendaries would be using the Japanese ones.
Right.
If those were in there. So like, obviously if you're a Westerner listening to the Japanese score album, you would recognize the Latias and Latios, sample or whatever you want to call it. And then the Arceus one, and there might be 1 or 2 more in there.
There was not as much as I expected, though. I definitely say there were a lot of themes being tied into some of these tracks because a lot happened in this movie, but not as much as I would have thought.
I don't think
I picked out every legendary's theme or such.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously there's Rayquaza in there. I don't remember if there was anything from the Deoxys and Rayquaza movie 7. And then we have Giratina. There might have been something from the Shaman movie in there.
Something sounded familiar and I couldn't place them. So it's possible I missed a few things. But yeah, like I was trying to pick out everybody's theme and I don't think I got more than 2 or 3.
That's quite possible. I mean, if you're going to pick out some of the previous ones, I mean, I've gone and said even the non-Koba stuff in the Lattes movie is some of the best stuff on the Japanese side score wise in there, and I think that was a good choice there if you're going to pick from previous movies and bring some of that stuff in there. Let's see, where was I about to go with that? Oh, geez.
Sorry, I sidetracked you.
But, on the flip side, though, if you've got all those legendary Pokemon in there and you try and bring in their themes, then you have to try and figure out, how do you sort of organize that with the rest of the music, which, Hoopa does have, I think, something of a theme in the Japanese side of this and also probably in the on the English side as well. But it's, it's because the other ones are pre-existing, it's maybe a little easier to pick those out. But the music that was created for this movie generally has more of that Middle Eastern feel to it. There's a lot of the sort of desert aesthetic. If you know, like I said, if you've ever played a desert level in a video game, that's what you can kind of wind up with. But I don't know. Do you think that was kind of a hard thing to sort of square those two?
um, yes and no, because like on the one hand, I really like that style of music and like that. Again, one of my complaints about Shinji Miyazaki is sometimes he doesn't take the opportunities that are presented to him to do something unique with the score. And this time he did. There was definitely a unique feel and a vision. And the track, The Confinement Urn, like I really like that track. It's really nice and really different from every other Pokemon movie. But at the same time, because a lot of these Pokemon movies, especially by this point in the series, kind of have that need to put stuff in just because it's a Pokemon movie. Like we have to have Team Rocket, we have to have this or that. So like when the power of science shows up and there's not a lot done to it to make it fit the musical world he's established, it sounds really weird. And I think the most obvious example is the track Meeting Hoopa, because it starts off with just that typical anime series stock music, like and we're meeting Ash and it's the start of a new journey. And then suddenly it does a hard 180 to get back to that, stringed instrument desert riff because Hoopa showed up.
Yeah,
I feel
yeah.
like, yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, but
No.
excuse me. Um, one of the things that, excuse me, but sorry about that, folks. But yeah, one of the things is it definitely uses that theme that was originally created for the anime, where it's the da 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 da, da, that one. That's used a couple times in there. It's kind of used it oftentimes. I think the introduction of an episode where the narrator would be talking about what's going on. It also has kind of a bit of a shopping, like Muzak type of vibe in there. Yeah. And it's in there a couple times. Not sure why they chose to bring back that specific one. I mean, I will give them the credit that it seems like one of my criticisms of the Japanese score for I Choose You is that some of the tracks they brought in from the anime sound extremely close, like so close that you'd swear that they're like the original recordings looped in certain ways, that they sound so dead on there. And that was kind of one of my criticisms there. Here they do, I think they're definitely new recordings, but
Yeah.
which I think gives them a little more leeway. But what I really wanted to suggest is that maybe this would have been a good movie. I don't know. I don't think he did, but if Shinji Miyazaki had brought in a second person to sort of help him work through some of these scenes and rework some of these themes and get them to work, because even all the legendary themes, those are from different movies, and getting them all to work together, they weren't designed that way. So that it might have been a good idea. And going back to movie 5, one of the better scored movies on the Japanese side, in my opinion, I think it would have been a good idea for them to bring in some help. What do you think about that, Anne?
I agree. I think on a lot of parts of this movie's production, bringing in somebody else to just smooth a few things over and help them connect better would have helped. But definitely, I would say you're right on the music, and Mr. Miyazaki does seem to show some of his best work when he has a sounding board to bounce things off of or another person to collaborate with. So that may have been all this needed to make it perfect. I find it interesting that again we have that sort of stock list of things we have to have in a Pokemon movie, and they chose not to have the opening theme, battle montage situation for this movie. And it's surprising that they were able to get rid of that, but it's like, no, we still have to have the power of science. No, we still have to have the battle music and not dress it up in a way to make it fit the world it's in. I found that to be interesting. And again, you might be right in saying that just another person there to kind of look over his shoulder and offer insight might have made all the difference. I don't know.
Okay, well, we've been talking a lot about the Japanese score. As we mentioned, that a lot of this movie was in fact rescored for the English version by Ed Goldfarb, and I'm not sure how many assistants, if he composed it all himself or what, but a lot of this was rescored. Now, thematically, like a lot of the Middle Eastern stuff is, it's different compositions, but very tonally very similar between the two versions of the movie.
Hmm.
I'm kind of unfortunately, probably in part because I don't have a separate audio track and I haven't watched this movie as many times as some of the other ones. I don't, nothing from like the dub score is really springing immediately to mind, but I do remember the general stylings of it. And I don't know, I'm not sure I have too much else to say. There isn't bad or anything like that. It's just that these two sides kind of came in from very different directions for kind of reasons we don't completely understand, but have some decent ideas about. And does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. There's a lot of good going on. There's a lot of meh going on.
I
But
mean,
they're in the same spirit.
if you have to look at this from, the English perspective, from Goldfarb's perspective, what he had to do was he had to create new music for a lot of those fight scenes that wasn't derivative or based on stuff from previous movies. And then, when Shinji Miyazaki, presumably when he went through the original score, I'm sure there were some meetings about, how much of the stuff we're going to use, how much of it should be original. I mean, I do think Hoopa gets better music as a character than, say, Zoroa and Zoroark in the Zoroark movie, where there's not really a discernible theme for those characters. Hoopa, if you listen to the score that in a couple places, you can definitely hear that. But I don't know. I think we talked a little bit about this before this discussion during our test stream, and I think the phrase I came up with, both of these sides of this kind of had an impossible task, but I kind of feel like one of them was more impossible than the other because it's obviously very difficult for from the English side, if you're going to do the whole rescore thing from Ed Goldfarb's perspective, to write stuff that's going to match up, that's going to, stand up against the previous themes that were brought back on the Japanese side, no matter how well written they would be. That's the way I see it. So I think Shinji may have had the easier job here. I don't know. I'm not really sure how to call this one.
Yeah, they definitely both had a lot of work in front of them.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm not sure exactly if that's the way I want to characterize it, but when folks say that they don't like the fact that those four movies, the Diancie movie, this movie, the Magirna movie, and I Choose You, were all rescored heavily for the English version. This is one of the four, maybe the one I can understand the best having a preference for the original Japanese score and wishing it had used that. I can certainly see that perspective. I still don't think it's perfect by any means, and I can see some of the pitfalls you can definitely run into there, but I don't know. Okay, well, I think that's about what we've got for the music part of this discussion. Now, before we do our next episode thing, we've got to do one more thing. We've got to rewind way back to the beginning and explain. Let's see, how are we doing on time here? Almost 10-2, so that's going to be fun.
Almost an hour.
Yeah, about 50 minutes of recording on my side. We're going to briefly summarize the movie and how we originally saw it. Okay, so let's see. For those of you who maybe don't remember super well what the Hoopa movie is about, Hoopa is this Pokemon that can sort of summon things. It can summon things from other parts of the world and stuff like that. And that can include, allowing people to move from one side of the world, or bringing in resources, or even bringing in other Pokemon. And, it eventually gets into the habit of summoning powerful Pokemon for it to fight. And in the opening sequence of the movie, we see its sort of more powerful form, the Unbound form, getting confined to this bottle. And we spend most of the rest of the movie dealing with the confined form, the more childlike form. And eventually we flash back to the current day, and it runs into Ash and Bonnie and Clement and Serena. since this is an XY movie, and sort of they go on sort of it's hard to kind of summarize the quest they go on, but basically they're trying to, sort of help Hoopa realize its true potential in a way, but it's a little hard to summarize sort of some of the goings on in this movie. As far as how we originally saw it, I know I saw it on TV. Would have been on Cartoon Network at the time. I DVR'd it, and I went to rewatch it just yesterday, the day before we recorded this, and I thought I had it on DVD somewhere, and I could not find it. Now, maybe it is somewhere around here, and I've just lost it. I ended up actually buying it off of YouTube. You can actually buy movies off of YouTube if you weren't aware, and that was how I watched this. Anne, how did you end up getting to know this movie initially?
I also saw it on TV, which is not the best way to see a Pokemon movie with, commercials and the like, but it did the job. I feel like not much could have saved this movie from the first watching. I have some feelings.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in our bonus segment at the end of the discussion. All right, well, let's so then we'll go back and now we'll record our next episode and then we'll do our bonus segment. So I guess another long one, but that's okay. All right. But anyways, that's kind of our thoughts on the music of the Hoopa movie. You may notice that since we've already covered the movies that come after this, so the Magirna movie, I Choose You, Power of Us, Detective Pikachu, you may realize, hey, wait a second, you guys are out of movies. You guys are going to do more of these. And yes, we are. We are definitely going to do that. And I put up a little poll on my community tab of YouTube, and thank you to everyone who voted there. And I gave them 3 options. One of those was to do a summary thing where we talked about what we've learned so far. We kind of did that last year with the anime convention, but I put that out there as a choice. Second choice was to get another side episode, sort of like we did with the live versions of Pokemon songs and other stuff like that. We will do more of those in the future. And of course, when new movies come out, we will do episodes on those. The third choice, the one that won out, was the idea of doing a discussion on the music of a Pokemon side game. And I decided, that's... Okay, let me do that. The third choice that I gave was to do a discussion on the music of a Pokemon side game. And I think there's going to be sort of our pattern for at least a little while, at least until the Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution comes to the States. We'll certainly do an episode on that. There is certainly the plan. But we're going to sort of rewind all the way back. And I decided that the first of the side games that we're going to analyze is the music of, Pokemon Pinball. This was a Game Boy / Game Boy Color game. It's one of those dual cartridges. It's actually, to be honest, kind of a little gimmicky. It's got that little rumble feature in it. But this is a Gen 1 side game that came out for the Game Boy. And as the name implies, of course, it is a pinball game. You hit a Pokeball around the board trying to capture, evolve, play little bonus games, score lots of points, of course, and trying to complete the Pokédex of the original 151 Pokemon. I definitely remember playing this back in the day. And what kind of experience did you have with this one?
It was kind of the mindless fun you get playing, say, Yoshi's Cookie or Tetris, I found, but it was delightful, and the Pokemon are super cute, and it's just a fun little pinball game.
Yeah, well, definitely, like we do with the movies, talk a little bit about the games themselves. But obviously, our discussion is going to be mostly on the music. If you do have a copy of this, you can actually. There is actually a full sound test that has all the songs there. A lot of them are derived from Red and Blue. A few of them are original. And there's also one derived from the Japanese version of the anime, which, if you're trying to track in a copy of this, you may notice is conspicuously absent from the 3DS Virtual Console. And I think that may be part of the reason why, but that is going to be our next discussion. We're going to obviously structure that one a little bit differently. We might do a pick 3 for each of us and sort of talk about it that way, like we do in some of our side episodes. But that is what we're going to move on to now that we are out of Pokemon movies. Until then, Anne, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you for having me.
This has been Stephen Reich. All right, folks, thanks. And now we can talk about the movie itself for 5 or 10 minutes and sort of go there. All right. Well, Anne, I didn't think this was the greatest Pokemon movie ever or anything like that. It's probably in the either the lower end. If I have my like 3/3 that I divide the Pokemon movies into these days, it's sort of the bottom of the middle tier or the upper part of the lower tier. Like the Magearna movie that comes after is definitely less appealing to me. But it sounds like you had some specific musical like tie-in things that you wanted to go over there. I know this is sort of the movie discussion, but it sounds like you had some specific things you want to mention.
Well, like it's less about the music. Like I just feel like it's so ironic that I feel that Shinji Miyazaki of the entire team, that production team, was the most on point in this movie. Like I don't understand this movie. It's not like Keldeo. I understand why it frustrates me. It feels like they just didn't try. But this movie, like they clearly tried to make something and it doesn't come together. It just all falls apart. Like what happens? I don't get this movie. I have frustrations. There's so much.
Well, to be honest, the emotion I got watching it yesterday is about 3/4 of the way through. I was kind of tired of it a little bit and just had kind of I wasn't watching it super closely, to be honest. But it definitely didn't quite keep my interest. Like I said, I do think the Magearna movie is definitely sort of the low point, and for whatever reason for me in terms of like maybe not the worst Pokemon movie ever, but definitely towards that bottom rung. This one is I definitely think better than that, but I do like to kind of joke. If we go back, Hoopa's a 6th generation Pokemon. And sort of one of the big things about it is it summons a lot of legendary. So I'd like to joke that Hoopa may be a 6th generation Pokemon, but it's pretty clear it was put in charge of the 5th generation of the Pokemon trading card game, which is heavily laden with legendaries and not to my liking. Part of that is actually has more to do with the 5th generation rules, but I kind of like to make that thing. So actually coming into this movie, I was a little bit pessimistic. So maybe it actually exceeded I may have had some low expectations. I think there was more to it than I thought. So maybe that's why I don't have quite the negative impression that you do, it seems like. But
yeah, it's not completely negative that because I can see that there's a lot of potential for some really great things. Like you've got this character of Hoopa who in the same way as Shaman, like, the gratitude Pokemon who is very ungrateful until the end. You've got this Pokemon that is possibly learning some life lessons and fixing some personality flaws. And you've got potentials for metaphor and confinement, and you've got evil Ash, you've got alternate costumes. Like you've got a lot of interesting things going on in this movie, but it's like say you order online like a beautiful piece of jewelry or something, and it's got all these jewels and gold and customized carvings, and it's like a work of art, but it arrives and you open the box and it's just like all the separate pieces and like all the components aren't connected. And that's this movie for me. Like I'm sure there was a masterpiece in that box at one point, but somehow everything just fell apart and just felt like everybody at the studio got to direct a scene or something. I don't understand what happened to this movie.
I don't totally disagree with that. I would say more that the pieces fit together, but not in a particularly interesting way.
Okay.
Like they don't it doesn't seem like it's more than the sum of its parts. Is that maybe what you're going with there?
Maybe, yeah. Like I just feel like I was it the last movie we were talking about where it felt like it needed another like pass of a second draft or something to maybe tweak the placement of certain scenes, and then it would have been much more impactful, some of the climax at the end. I feel like this is another one where it's like maybe if we just went over that script one more time, we could have dug out the jewel that appears to be hiding in there somewhere.
I suppose that's one possibility. I mean,
Maybe not.
to be honest, I don't know. I mean, I kind of want to bring up the TCG examples in part because I don't know that having more legendaries necessarily makes a better movie. I think they maybe thought that having a bunch of legendaries in the movie, it obviously got attention,
Mm-mm.
but I don't know that it made the scope or um, the interest level, or I don't. Maybe it didn't make the movie as interesting as they thought it would on paper, and
Well,
maybe
mm,
that's kind of the issue because I know, like, for example, in the current in the VGC, let's just bring in every major aspect of the Pokemon franchise. Why don't we? When we have those periods where the format allows a large number of legendary and some mythical Pokemon are pretty much always banned from VGC. So Pokemon
mhm.
like Mew and Hoopa and Arceus and stuff like that you don't encounter normally in the course of the game are virtually never allowed. But stuff like Rayquaza or Kyogre or Groudon are allowed. It seems like those events they might get a lot of interest, like from the spectators, but I seem to think on another level the competitors aren't as interested in them, and I kind of get tired of them sometimes. Do you think
Breaking
maybe there was like that so just to rewind a bit, so what I kind of said there is, do you think that having so many legendaries slash mythicals in a movie sounds like a great idea on paper, but in reality doesn't create necessarily the opportunities?
Possibly. And that might be a clue to what happened with this movie. Because on the one hand, one of the positives about this movie was there was some sick fight scenes, and we were at a point in the Pokemon anime where the animation could support some high level action scenes. Um, so in that case, having all the legendaries there for like a massive battle with some really complex fight choreography and backgrounds and like stuff that we couldn't see, we couldn't physically realize in like the first movie, was really amazing. But I definitely think when it comes to action movies, if you can't get a personal meaningful plot down, then you're just watching a lot of explosions and it doesn't mean as much. And they definitely not failed but struggled in getting the character connections and the story through during those fight scenes, I think, at least to like get the payoff that they wanted. So yeah, I can see like on paper that's a really big attention getter, and obviously their animation team and their storyboard team can do a big scene with a bunch of legendaries and make it dynamic and compelling and visually interesting. But some of the rest of the plot that makes the movie mean something seems to have gotten a little bit disjointed and lost. So so yeah, maybe execution didn't realize the dream that was on paper the way they wanted to. Maybe the story they had in the writers room was a very different vision.
Yeah. So I mean, let's see. As far as I'm concerned, the movie with the most legendary Pokemon in it that I enjoy, I guess it's got to be 2000 because there's four in there. And I can't think. Well, I guess the Zoroark movie does technically sort of have four.
Mm.
I like that one. That's not as widely loved as Pokemon 2000. Um, so I'm sure there is a point of diminishing returns on all of this. Like I said, I don't know if I followed the battling quite as closely when I was watching it yesterday as you might. Sounds like you might have.
Well, guess
But
not.
I think I would have preferred, rather than having them like having more like one-on-one stuff with the legendary Pokemon going against each other. I think that might have been more interesting than having sort of the free fall we kind of wound up with.
Mm. I
But
definitely think that when it comes to the legendaries, anytime the movie doesn't treat them as characters and just kind of treats them as plot devices or special effects, the movie suffers. So I think it would be really interesting to see a movie with that many legendaries, but have the same care and attention to detail that they gave Hoopa, so that they all have a character arc and it all means something. And maybe that's a movie that we don't need Ash for. But yeah, like you can't they feel like they don't have any purpose being there if they're not characters in their own right.
It's also worth noting that in part because of the setting of the city where all this takes place is I think all the Pokemon that are summoned for the big legendary battle are ones that can either fly or sort of float in the air. So we're not going to get like the legendary beasts from Gold, Silver, Crystal. We're not going to get. We're obviously not going to get Groudon. Maybe Kyogre in there. I don't remember if that. I don't think that was one of the ones
they got him in the prologue. They got him in the prologue.
It's in the prologue, and I think there's some of those are definitely in there showing their primal evolutions. But as far as like the fight scene towards the end, I mean, we obviously have Rayquaza, we have Zekrom, we have Dialga and Palkia, and stuff like that. But I think I would have preferred something like going back to 2000 and I guess the Zoroark movie as well. I think having a larger number of legends, if of some sort of tie to each other. So like in one, we have 3 Pokemon that are, the legendary bird trio from Gen 1, and then you have Lugia. So, and that also sets up kind of the sides in that conflict. Sort of similar in the Zoroark movie. There are some clearly because they're the fake versions of the legendary beasts, and then there are the actual ones that show up in there. And I guess I was going to say, I Choose You has 3 of them. It has obviously Ho-Oh, has Marshadow, and then it has Entei in it. And that's really about it, other than some brief cameos and sort of like the epilogue or whatever you want to call it. I think is more or less what there is in there. And like I said, I think more legend. I as someone who still has some bitterness over the Gen 5 TCG, as I sort of outlined earlier, for various reasons that don't just have to do with legendaries and are partially my own perspective on the trading card game. Like I said, I don't know if the Pokemon's abilities were used all that well in the movie. Oh, we got Kyurem is definitely in there. It's got I think it even uses its fused form or whatever it's called. Yeah. White Kyurem, Black Kyurem. It uses at least like one of those. So yeah, like I said, I don't think this is the weakest, but it's definitely towards that lower end for me. Any kind of other thoughts, Anne?
Yeah, no, this chain is not holding up the Pokemon chandelier very well, so I agree.
Okay, so like I said, not awful. Not like I said, we don't want like to get too far into like hyperbole. Like we're saying, oh man, my life was totally ruined by watching this movie.
Right? Yeah, no, it just
that's ridiculous. But we will point out, we will criticize a movie like this if we think it's towards the lower end of the quality spectrum for. At least within Pokemon movies. All right, I think we could stop the recording. I do have a few other things. I think we got everything we needed in there because we went back and did the thing where we do this. So for the folks in the audience, thank you very much for coming. I think Honey Drop 777 has this. The building's getting blown up. I mean, there seemed to not be as much concern about that as I would have liked when we have. That's one of the perks of Pokemon 2000 because it occurs on the open seas around a couple of islands. The stakes are high, but in the immediate vicinity, they don't have to worry too much about things getting destroyed. That's one thing about having the Pokemon like climax of a Pokemon movie in sort of an isolated area is that you don't have to worry about that as much.
Yeah, no, there's some Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny's freaking out in Dahara City.
But as far as what's coming up, first of all, don't forget, let me just go ahead and post up that image since I didn't get to show it. We did in the test stream. But don't forget that I have a new episode of the Digest podcast that came out earlier this week. It is of our live Pokemon music session that Ann and I did. I think we did it back in early May. Anna's trying to get the Detective Pikachu thing up on her Patreon feed soon. And then a couple weeks later, I'll probably have that episode out on my podcast feed, sometime before I go to the World. But that is something you can totally check out there. Like I said, it's a shorter episode than this one will be, even once we edit it down. But that one is. I want to point out that I am part of the PCN Pokecasters Network now, and this is our first episode under that banner. But you can take a look at that episode there. See, it also has that segment in the middle where it's another Why It Works segment that I'm going to try and get the video up soon, the video version up soon, about M2M's Don't Say You Love Me, talking about that and why it works. Admittedly, it does not really work in a direct tie to the plot of the movie, but it does serve an actual purpose. It's like I said, so that one might be why it kind of works when I title that one for that. But I like doing those, and feel free to suggest if you want other ones. The series is generally designed for songs that are not Pokemon in origin, but are associated with the franchise. I might do a reverse episode on the Power of One of why it works everywhere else outside of Pokemon. It works in Pokemon, works in that movie, but yeah,
there's other applications.
Yeah, so yeah, we'll see if another Pokemon song at some point gets not usurped, but misappropriated by politics at some point. Let's see. So what else as far as that there, I'm also expecting either this week or next week. Let's see, the digital version of Detective Pikachu comes out this week, by the way, on digital services. But I'm also expecting to pretty soon here, when it comes in from, I guess, Germany, get the vinyl soundtrack score album for Detective Pikachu. Really looking forward to that and hope to do an unboxing on that one. I know that speaking of the Mewtwo Strikes Back movie, the score for that is coming out in Japan relatively soon. They do wait for those until after the movie comes out. I did unbox last week the new version of Together with the Wind on stream last time. I kind of like doing those. Those are kind of fun. What else is coming up here? Always on the lookout for, if any of you have contacts with some of the musicians who's worked on the show. I tend to have a bit of an edge, I suppose, on some of that. But always looking for stuff with that. But if you do have any leads on there, that's always helpful. Let's see. Trying to think anything else. And I know you're trying to get back into, speaking of podcasts, your own podcast groove.
Yes. I get out of bed in the morning sometimes. I'm doing my best.
Yeah, well, keep working on that. I appreciate you coming down for this and continuing to do this. But yeah, so like I said, keep an eye out for all of that. Otherwise, I think that's going to do it for our live stream. I'll talk with Ann a little bit more, but thank you very much, everyone who came in. If you missed most of this, don't worry. It'll be processed in about 10, 15 minutes, hopefully, by YouTube, and you can go back to the beginning and watch the whole thing. Certainly encourage you to do that. All right, folks, thanks.
Thank you.